Now, Sean, you are legal counsel for ADF International, and one of the issues that you're dealing with right now, and there are so many issues around the globe, this particular one is happening in Nigeria, where there are two different colleges and they're government schools that have reportedly banned Christian religious activities on campus. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, thank you for having me on, Billy, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, the situation in Nigeria, just generally, is a very, very difficult situation for Christians in particular, especially in the northern part of the country. Nigeria itself, it's the largest democracy in Africa. There's about over 200 million people who live there. It's roughly equally divided between Christians and Muslims, with the northern portion of the country being predominantly Muslim, with a significant population of Christians. And so a lot of times those Christians are pretty marginalized and face a lot of discrimination. And that's what we're seeing in these two universities. So you're absolutely right. These are public universities. One is a state university, one's a federal university in a state called Katsina. It's in the far northwest of Nigeria. And there are Christian students there. It's actually a pretty high number of Christian students, some Christian faculty. And they, since I think 2017 for one of the universities and 2022 for the other one, there has been a ban on the Christian students being able to use any facilities for worship, for fellowship, anything like that. And the reason it's discrimination is that the Muslim students are completely allowed to use all of these facilities. In fact, there are mosques on campus. There are specific buildings for them. And in Nigeria, just like in a lot of places in the US or around the world, to accommodate different religious groups, the universities will build chapels or they'll build mosques or anything like that on campus. And that's the normal case in most of Nigeria. But in these two particular universities, they're not doing that. They're preventing Christians from using those spaces, from worshiping on campus, having fellowship. They have to go off campus to do that. It's just plain discrimination.
So they've locked doors, they've pushed them out of the buildings where they would meet, and they're allowing the other religious groups, the Muslims, the others, to meet on campus and to do what they would normally do, right? But the Christians are the only ones essentially unable to do that. Is that accurate?
That's right. I think the only groups that are allowed to use the facilities on campus are just Muslim groups. There's not too many other religious groups in that area. It's mostly going to be either Muslim or Christian or some African traditionalist religions, but that's a very small group. And so, so this really is something where it's very explicitly favoring one religion, and in this case, Islam, against the other religion, which in this case is Christianity. And that's just totally in violation of the Constitution. It's in violation of these individuals' fundamental rights. The Nigerian Constitution, it protects very explicitly the freedom of religion or belief. People are able to worship, practice, do all of those kinds of things. And again, this is something that you see in other universities throughout Nigeria, that Christians and Muslims both have worship spaces, both have fellowship spaces, and it's not an issue. But in this area, it's become an issue. It's a very unfortunate thing. And when you just think about what Christians are facing generally in northern Nigeria, the discrimination, it is really astounding to see it coming from these public entities, from these government-run facilities, one federal, one state. That's a really, really outrageous thing. And when you combine that with some of the targeted killings that Christians are facing all across the north, there's been hundreds of kidnappings recently, just the last couple of weeks. It's a really horrible situation for them, and this just contributes to that marginalization.
Well, you go back to 2022 when there was a stoning of a Christian college student at the beginning of that year. And that was really the first time I think a lot of people internationally, of course, people like you and ADF International and others are very aware of what's going on there. But I think that incident was one that woke a lot of people up, and they said, wait a minute, a Christian student was stoned to death. What is going on here? And as you stated, we've seen again and again and again, young people, families, people being abducted. This is horrific. And you mentioned a couple of things I think are important before we come back to this particular instance to talk about. This is a country that is very much, it's not like it's 90% Muslim, 10% Christian. There's a split where almost half of the country is Christian. Why has it been that this has been sort of allowed to fester in this way and grow in this way?
It's a really interesting question, and it's a difficult question, and a lot of it I think has been primarily because the government is not prosecuting people who commit these heinous crimes. So you're talking about Deborah Yakubu. She was a young 20s college student up in Sokoto State, which is very close by Katsina State, where these university cases are happening. And all she did, there was a class WhatsApp group, and all she did was respond to some of those messages. She mentioned Jesus. She thanked Jesus for one of her exams. Sometimes she did complain about some folks who used it more for kind of religious proselytization or something like that. But that's really all she did. And because that offended her Muslim classmates in that situation, it was about 50 of them, maybe more. They whipped up this huge mob, as you say, about 2 years ago, and they took over the school. They overwhelmed the security there. The police forces did not arrive to be able to help do anything, and they stoned her to death. They beat her, and then they lit her body on fire. And that became an international story because people got video of it, and it's horrific video of these attackers. A lot saying Allahu Akbar, that sort of thing, while she is on fire in the back. And it's a very disturbing video, and it's this disturbing thing that's happening. These blasphemy accusations, these accusations that people should not be able to live together. That if you say anything that is contrary to my beliefs as a Muslim, that somehow gives me the right to attack you or to push you out of the community. It's a really worrisome trend, and we've seen these kinds of blasphemy laws being used against Christians, against minority Muslims, actually, not just Sufi Muslims. There's many cases of them being sentenced to death because they stated beliefs that are different from the predominant view of Islam. And so you have this disturbing trend, and nobody is ever punished. In Deborah's case, they arrested just two attackers, and they released them a year later for failure to prosecute. And so they are free. No one has been held accountable for that. No one is ever held accountable for any of these kinds of attacks. Over Christmas, you had, I think, at least 200 Christians who were slaughtered in a village in Plateau by militants who are driven at least in part by religious belief. And nobody's been found. Nobody's in prison. Nobody's arrested. Nothing happened. So I think that impunity is a major, major part that emboldens the extremists to be able to take these kind of positions and do these kinds of actions.
Well, and to your point, when you have, two colleges coming up with these policies, people are watching. And if these colleges are allowed to continue doing this, other schools will follow suit. You'll see it grow. This is what happens, right? If nobody's held accountable, what happens? The people behaving badly, they behave even worse. And so what is ADF International doing right now to intervene in this particular instance when it comes to Christians being banned from religious activity on these campuses?
So one of the things that we do is we support local lawyers who are taking these kinds of religious freedom cases on the ground in Nigeria and all around the world. And it's something that I'm very proud of, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to support these people who are so courageous, the lawyers who are courageous, their clients. It takes a lot of courage to be a Christian student in an area where you already feel pretty marginalized, to stand up to these big universities, to stand up to people who have already said we don't necessarily want you to express your faith. And so to do that, I think takes a lot of courage. And so we support those lawyers, and we do a lot of advocacy, things like this interview, just to let people know what's happening. 90% of the Christians who are killed around the world, it's thousands and thousands, 90% of those Christians who are killed are in Nigeria. That's how extreme this persecution can be. And when you have schools where people just want to be educated, they just want to learn to improve themselves and to improve their country. Nigeria is a poor country. And so these kinds of, going to university, it's a very important thing for them to be able to support their society, support everything. And so when you have that kind of discrimination that says, no, you as a Christian, you are not welcome here. That's a really terrible thing. And to have it be supported basically by public universities, by government support, to say that's okay, it's not okay. And as you say, we are very concerned that it's going to spread. That's why we want to let people know. We know that this has been happening for years. It's been happening at these universities for years. When we heard about it, we said, wow, that's something that needs to be stopped. I've heard from other people since this story broke that, hey, this kind of thing is happening at my university too. And so we're looking into those different cases. But we've seen a lot of just incredible responses in Nigeria and around the world. People saying this is wrong. This is not what we should be promoting. We shouldn't be discriminating against anybody. Everybody should have the right to freedom of worship, to freedom to come together and have fellowship with your co-religionists, and that nobody should be harmed for that. Nobody should be killed for that. Nobody should be discriminated against because of that. And that's our position in Nigeria. That's our position all around the world.
Well, and just before we go here, how are the college students doing? Have we heard anything from them? Those Christian college students who have really, for years now been unable to worship and do what everybody else is able to do on their campus. How are they holding up?
Well, it's one of these things, and it's amazing when you work with persecuted Christians, and in the West we're very comfortable. We sit in nice places, and the people who are persecuted, they have very difficult lives, and they face threats and discrimination every day. And yet, in terms of the Spirit moving through them, in terms of their relationship with God, it's such an inspiration, because they're always the most joyful people, and they really take they see that persecution, and they turn it around for the glory of God. So it's just an incredible witness from these folks. The Christian students, they're glad that people are praying for them. They're asking people to pray for them. They're asking people to speak out about this case, to speak out on behalf of freedom of worship, on freedom to live out your faith in public, to not be harassed. So I think that they are in good spirits. Obviously, they're concerned, but these are very courageous, very faith-filled people. If you want to learn more, you can go to adfinternational.org. We have lots of cases on Nigeria and all across the world, where you can see the same story of people who are persecuted for their faith, and just how strong their faith is. And I think that's just a wonderful inspiration.
Well, Sean, I agree, and I appreciate you coming on today to break it all down for us. Again, they can go over to ADF International for more information. Appreciate your time today.